Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to DelphiCon and this webinar introducing Spring for Delphi, Spring Framework. We're joined here by Stefan Glinke, and I'm going to hand it right over to him for his introduction and his presentation.
Thank you, and welcome to the session, Introduction to Spring4D, taking Delphi development to the next level. Well, that's a mouthful, I have to say, but my name is Stefan Glinke, and I'm a software developer, MVP, blogger, and obviously speaker in conferences with over 20 years of experience with Delphi. I'm also the lead developer of Spring4D. So what exactly is Spring4D? It's an open source library for Delphi XE or higher. You can freely use it in any commercial or non-commercial project because it uses the very permissive Apache license. It's an extension to the Delphi RTL, so to say, so you won't find any visual components in it or any things that you can drag and drop on forms, well, except one exception that we will see. It uses advanced generics and much RTTI in many of its features. It's under active development and it's practicing the so-called dog fooding, which means the author of the library and me and my co-workers, we are actively using it in our own commercial software. It follows the principle of pick and choose, so it doesn't dictate how you have to write your own application. You can take useful things you encounter in the library and use them in your code how you want. And you can take certain things and leave other things out of it. The currently released version is the 1.2.4, sorry, and currently development for the 2.0 is going on, and I hope and I plan to release it still in 2020, but you know, things can change, but most of the stuff's already finished. So some of the things you might see today, you will miss if you are using the released version. I will mention when I'm showing some new things you won't see in the 1.2, but in a 2.0. Well, how to get the library if you never used it before? You can either pull it with Git from this URL I have on the slide here, or you can actually use the zip file if you don't want to use Git, and make sure you are on the correct branch when you're downloading the zip file, because there are different links on the Bitbucket page. Then you can use either the build XE, that is just a small installer that just then runs MS build and compiles all the packages and builds the DCUs and updates the Delphi library path for you. If you don't want to use that, you can simply open the project group and compile all the packages yourself to produce the DCUs, because my personal recommendation is to always use pre-compiled DCUs and not compile the sources every time again, because given on the use of generics, it might take quite some time and some extra seconds that you don't want to spend if you compile your application, just to compile the same code that you did not change. Well, the quick overview, what is in the entire package of Spring4D, there are different runtime packages. That doesn't mean you have to use runtime packages with your application. It's just to organize the source inside the library. There's the base package that contains RTL extensions, goodies that are inspired by some other languages or are not in the RTL already. Contains a rich number of collections, which we'll see later. And there we have the core package that contains a DI container and an interception/mocking library. I will not go into details about those because that could easily span an entire session of its own. Then we have the data package, which just hosts an object dataset, which is the only component you might install in the IDE and drag and drop on your form or data module. And it is a component to connect the interface-based collections of Spring4D to some data-aware controls like a TDB grid. Then we have the persistence package, which contains an ORM, and the extensions package with some cryptographic and some other utilities. Although that package is not that much maintained, it works, but it's not actively worked on, and I'm not a cryptographic expert, so if you really want to use cryptographic things, you might use it, but I recommend using a library that is specialized on cryptographic things. Well, we will look at most of the stuff of Spring base package today, and this will be the nullable type, the event of T type, some types that you call smart pointers, which is the shared of T and weak of T, and then of course the collections, which in my honest opinion is one of the most amazing features of the Spring library. If you watch at the nullable of T, you might have seen it in other languages like C# or .NET. It's a type-safe data type which can add the state of null or no value to an existing data type that does not have such a notion. For example, you have a date time and you also want to have the state of I don't have a date for something. So historically, you choose some date where you know that date will never occur, like minus 40,000, and that value is then the state for I don't have a date. And then there's the infamous true false or file not found enum, where you, well, which is not a Boolean in itself, but has a third state added to it. And if you model something like that, where you have a yes or no, or actually you don't have an answer, you might consider using a nullable of Boolean. Or someone might say, well, we have variants that already can contain null and values. However, a nullable of T does not allow implicitly converting between otherwise incompatible data types. Like a nullable of integer will never be assigned compatible to a string, while a variant can easily convert to string and to integer in both directions. And if it's a string that is not a valid number, you might get an exception at runtime. With the nullable type, you won't get something like this. Let's see the code for some example for the nullable type. I have in my demo project here. And if you want to use the nullable type, you simply add the Spring uses a unit to your uses, which comes from the Spring-based package. So I have a nullable of date time here, and I use the now value for a local date time variable for now, and then I just print if the nullable has a value, which is a bool property, or I can print the string directly to a string. And then I assign my date time to my nullable of date time. And it is important to know that in contrast to some other types, a nullable, even if you use it as a local variable, has always a defined state, which is I don't have a value. So even if you use it as a local variable and you don't assign a value to it, it will always say that it does not have a value. After I assigned some datetime value to it, I can again ask if it has a value, and I can print the value to a string, which is underneath using the known toString formatting that you have in the RTL. So for my datetime, it will use my regional settings for the datetime format, which is in German right now. I can then assign nil to my nullable, which clears the value in it. When I ask it then again if it has a value, it will say that it does not have a value again because I then assigned the empty state to it. If I don't know if I have a value or if I don't have a value, and I don't want to use the has value before to check, and I want always a value even if it does not have a value, and I want to provide some default for the state of emptiness, I can use the get value or default method. This method also allows passing a default value in case the nullable does not contain a value. I can also compare nullables to each other, or I can compare the nullable to the type they are for. So I could here also compare the nullable to a date time. So in this case, both my n and n2 are empty because I explicitly set n to empty and I did never initialize n2. So they are both empty, and equal should say that they are equal. If I then assign a value to one of them and compare them, they should be different. And if I add the same value to the other nullable, they should be equal. So if I run my code here, you see it first says that it's empty, so it returns false in a has value, so it doesn't have a value. It prints, in this case, null. If it has a value, I can get the value, as I said, in the local format settings when I use the toString. I can also use the .value to directly access the value and then process it any further. In this case, I passed no default value, so it uses the default for the date time, which is 0, and 0 is the 30th December of 1899. And two empty nullables are equal, and two nullables with the same value are equal as well, while a nullable that is empty and a nullable that contains a value are not equal. So let's go to the event of T, which is also called a multicast event. It is similar to the observer pattern. Basically, it's the observer pattern as an easy-to-use type where you don't have to implement it yourself. You can simply implement the publish subscribe with it, similar to regular events we all know from Delphi. It does support any event signature, and that signature is then provided via the generic type parameter here. So if you have a notify event, you specify your event as an event of tNotify event. It is also very fast and thread safe. And with fast, I mean it is as fast as if you would call the loop yourself. Let's see the implementation. Again, the type is from the Spring unit. And I declared a local variable here, my f_on_mouse_move, which I declared as an event of tMouseMove event. And the tMouseMove event is the one from classes, which specifies shift state and the X and Y coordinates when I move a mouse over a control. Then I have a small event subscriber class here, which is in the other unit. It's just a component that has also a multicast event for a position event, and this position event will give me the X and Y coordinates. It also has a handle mouse move event handler that is for the tMouseMove event. When I create this, I then add this subscribers handle mouse move event to my f_on_mouse_move event. And you can see here that is the difference to a regular event. I have an add method because an event of T basically is like a list of event handlers. And once it gets triggered, it calls all the event handlers and not only one, as we have with the regular and classic events in Delphi. So on the one side, I have my own mouse move, and I add the handle mouse move from my subscriber. And then on the other side, I have the onUpdate event of the subscriber, and I add simply 2 event handlers of my own to this onUpdate event. The one is simply printing the coordinates to my caption of the form, and the other one is changing the color to red if my Y coordinate is higher than 300 and changing it back to the window color if it's less. What I do then is connecting these things. Log is my memo here I have on the form, and it of course has an on mouse move event. And I connect my event of T mouse move to the on mouse move, and I can do this with operator overloading because the event of T is a record type, and that one has an operator overload where I can assign to a T. So I have here my T mouse move, and I can assign the event of T mouse move there. I can also have, and this is a regular notify event on the event itself. I can be notified if there's any change happening, which means someone attached an event handler or someone removed an event handler. And I have my notify event change here, which simply shows a message that it changed. I'll show you in a minute why I added this. So back to the event subscriber, we can see I have the handle mouse move, which is being called from the forms event of T. And this one simply takes the X and Y coordinates and invokes the local F on update event, which will then trigger the 2 event handlers that I attached via the form. There are basically 2 types. One is the record type, and you never saw some create here because this record type uses auto initialization as soon as I call some method on it or assign it somewhere. So you never have to create them and you never have to destroy them. However, if you give them to other parts of your code, you should do it via the interface-based type, which is iEvent of T. And here I have the getter, and I can again use a direct assignment because my event of T is assignment compatible with the iEvent of T. But you should never give the event of T outside of this class. This is just for some fields, and you don't have to create them explicitly in your code. So when I click this button, I attach the event, and you can see when I move my mouse over the memo here, the coordinates are getting shown in the caption, and when I go over the 300 in the Y coordinate, it gets red. And now the interesting thing is when I close, I get the notification of the change, and that is because my event subscriber component, which I created here with the owner self, which destroys it automatically when I close my form and it gets destroyed. An event knows if the event handler it is attached to is of a T component, and then it automatically disconnects this event. So if I have a event handler that is implemented by a T component class, and that instance of that T component is destroyed, it would automatically notify the event where it got attached to disattach the event handler. Next are the so-called smart pointers. We have the shared of t and the weak of t, and they can use to add lifetime management to objects or other resources without explicitly stating a try finally block. And it makes it way easier to pass around such resources, because otherwise you always have to know, well, which is the part of the code that has to, in the end, destroy something. And if you share some resource with more than one consumer, it might get cumbersome to track down which is the last consumer that is responsible for destroying these. And so this is basically just like interfaces with the reference counted. So you can add this reference counting to types that don't have a notion of reference counting. With the weak of t type, you can also avoid circular references, and this is in all the versions Spring4D comes from, which is even before Delphi got added the weak attribute, which you can put on interfaces. Plus there's a little bonus. A weak of t works also for objects on all platforms, and if you have a weak of t where t is an object, this reference will get notified if the object it is referencing will be destroyed, which is usually not the case. Let's see the code for this. I have three different uses of the shared here. There's also a record type, which is shared of t, and I can directly assign my string list to this shared for a string list, and I then have to access the string list in my shared of t string list with the value property, and I then can access all the methods of my t string list. I can also pass this directly to any method that wants a string list to be passed, or any of the base types, in this case the add strings method of the memo lines. Then there's the interface-based iShared of t, which is similar, but the usage is a bit different. You cannot directly assign a value to this one. You cannot directly assign the string list to an iShared of string list. So in this case, we make use of the shared.make method. And because you are passing the correct type here, we are creating a string list, which is returning a string list. Usually you would have to specify this type here, but in this case, the type inference of Delphi just works, and this make method will return an iShared of what was passed here, in this case, an iShared of t string list, and you can assign it to our local variable. When I'm using the interfaced version, I can directly access all the members without typing .value, because this is a special interface type, which is actually like a function, like an anonymous method that returns the string list all the time. And again, I can directly pass this one to my addStrings method. Now the advanced use of this, if I have something that is not just an object, or I want to perform any operation before the object is being destroyed, I can specify an optional finalizer proc, which is the second parameter here in my make method. And in this case, I have an iShared of t strings to show you that even the base type works here. In this case, I have to specify the generic type parameter here, because otherwise it would not properly compile. So this is the method as it's being called once the shared goes out of scope or reaches the reference count of 0. And then I'm printing this out here. Otherwise, I'm printing in the other cases, I'm printing before I'm exiting the method. And here I will first have a slow delay, so you can see that the add strings is then later called after I press the button. And in this case, when I'm giving the finalizer proc, this one replaces the otherwise just freeing of the object. So I have to do the freeing myself in the finalizer where I did some other things. So this can also be used if you have something like a system where you can using handles or even the Win API, and you can make a shared of some file handle. And then once this thing goes out of scope, you can specify a finalizer proc, and in this finalizer proc, you can call then close handle or what is necessary to free the resource you are using. So if I press all these three buttons, you notice the short delay on the shared tree. And if I close my application, there's no memory leak report, although I specified the report memory leaks on shutdown, because otherwise, if I would just create a string list and would not free it, it will report a memory leak. So this just works like a try final block here, and I in fact could then pass the string list down to, or the shared of the string list down to some other code, and when it's done using the string list, it will automatically destroy it. So then I have a weak reference to something, and while I'm not demonstrating the use of the circular interface references here, because we also already know that, here's just a demonstration that it also works for objects, which the weak attribute that got added is just for interfaces, at least on the desktop platforms or on all platforms in the latest Delphi versions that don't have arc anymore. So here I'm creating my string list, and I'm also assigning to the weak of strings, which is then the base type, which here works because the string list is assignment compatible to tstrings. Add my line here, and then I'm printing if the reference is still alive. I can then also pass the weak reference to some method that expects tstrings, which again uses operator overloading because this again is a record type. And if we usually do a free here, of course, in this case, I have to use the free because it's just a plain object reference and not a shared of tstring list here. Usually, if you do this here in this code, then the weak references, if this was just a tstrings variable, it would point to some memory that was already freed. So you have a so-called dangling reference. And not even free and nil would help here because I would free and nil on the SL variable, and the SL variable would then nil, but not the weak ref or the other reference that I assigned to. And this might be some completely other code where I assigned something to, and then I would have to come up with some notification mechanism where all participants that have references to something that might be destroyed are getting notified. And this is basically what is happening here underneath. So if you assign something to a weak, this is internally tracking this reference, and then if that object is destroyed, it notifies all the weak references, similar to how the weak references under ARC work. So I can then call the isAlive method, or I can get the target property, which is always pointing to the instance, similar to the .value on the shared. Or I can also compare it to nil or some other strings variable if it's the same one. And we can see at this point it is alive because we assigned a valid object to it. And then later, after we destroyed it, although we did not do any assignment to the weakref variable, it will print false because it is not alive. Target is not assigned, and weak reference itself compares to nil as unequal, as equal. It is nil. Now to the collections. They are all interface-based, which makes memory management well, a no-brainer, because you can simply pass around collections, return them from functions without worrying about where I actually have to destroy my list or my dictionary because I don't know, or I have many disconnected places that just have passed items in lists around, and I don't have to worry about all the freeing of those objects and those lists. It gives me an extensive API via the Enumerable of T, and that enables writing expressive code less cumbersome because I don't have to code all my loops explicitly, but I can use some of the nice methods of Enumerable of T, and therefore also on all the collections because they all inherit from Enumerable of T. And this is not the enumerable of T from the system functions, but a type from Spring collections.pass. While not 100% of a replacement, it is meant as a replacement for system generic collections. So if you're using these and you might want to have some more advanced features on those collections, consider moving to Spring collections. One difference to classic collection usage, though, is that you should not create your T-list of something or your T-dictionary from Spring collections yourself. Always use the factory methods from the T-collections static class in Spring collections. So all you have to do is just add Spring collections to a users, and you have all the collection types for your use. So avoid using directly any Spring collections.star units in your code. The collection interfaces are organized in different categories. Well, base type is enumerable of T, which is a sequence of items. Then there's the collection, which is a collection of items that are not index based. And then on top of that, there's the list, as we know, which has all the index-based methods on it. There's map, which is the base type for the following types, which is the dictionary and multi-map. And then there are sets and multi-sets. As you saw, you have the normal list or the normal collection, and you have a read-only list and a read-only collection. There is no immutable collections in Spring4D where it would create copies if you add to the collection. There are classic collections and lists where every time you add or remove items, the state of the list is changed. But sometimes you might want to have only read access to something. And then you should consider just passing the read-only version of that list or that dictionary to some code. That doesn't mean that your code automatically becomes thread safe in case of some threads might add items to the list and the other thread just reads them. But it ensures that that code that should not add to the list or remove from it can actually do it. So enumerable of T represents an unordered sequence of items that are not yet materialized. It's the core of our collection types, as I said, and it contains a huge number of methods that you can work with. So this not materialized, what does that mean? So if you have an enumerable of T, you don't have to think about, oh, I have these items in it. Think of it as kind of query. You have something that states that there are some items, but you don't know which items that are. Like if you specify an SQL statement, You just say, okay, give me these customers where their order total are higher than 9,000, and then you specify this SQL statement. But having this SQL statement doesn't mean you already have this customer data. Only if you execute your SQL statement, you might get these results you want. And it's the same with the Enumerable and, for example, the where method. It returns, again, an enumerable of customers in this case. But if I just have my variable of an enumerable of customer, it doesn't mean I have any customers in it. They only might appear when I actually execute or iterate these. Of course, the original customers list might contain those customers, but there's not a second list being built that then contains all the customers with a certain number of total orders. So this goes with the streaming and the deferred execution. So when I execute any method on Enumerable, and this method leads to some results, the operation that is then being done is as lazy as it can be. In this example, let's say we have the customers with the criteria to only get certain customers. And I say then, okay, take 10 of those customers. Oh, there's a missing dot here. And if you have like 1,000 customers and many of them would have this number of total orders, and I only take 10 of them, there's only this filter delegate is only executed as often as it needs to be to yield the 10 elements. And as I said, with the statement, and think of an enumerable as I have a query of something, the materialization of any items that might sit behind it only starts when I iterate over it, or if I call some method that requires this operation. Then we have iCollection of T, and this is then a collection really behind it. You can then know that there are materialized items behind it. There's an array or some other kind of data structure behind it that holds your customers. And that one already has the add, remove, extract methods. And it offers an on-change event where you can be notified if any changes happen to these collections, like adding customers or removing them. And then on top of that, there's the iList of T, and that is what we know as the list where we can have index access, and on top of the add or remove methods, we can say, okay, I want to add elements at certain positions into the list, and I want to get the position of the items, and I can call sort of it because sorting is based on the order in the list. So let's look into our enumerable. I have my numbers here, which is an enumerable of integer. And I say simple, okay, give me like 10 numbers. This is the start, and I want 10 elements for it. And then I just can simply iterate over those items and print them out. I can also add this where clause here and say, okay, I just want to have the odd numbers. And then I can pass in a filter delegate here where I get in the type that I want, or the item that I want to filter, and then I can apply the filter function on it. And again, I can then enumerate over the enumerable, and this enumerable is a different one from this one, where this one is just the numbers with an applied filter. So when I execute this one, so I get the numbers 1 to 10 for the first one, which was the range from 1 to 10, and then I get the odd numbers. And if I called the odd numbers, give me the last number, I just get the 9 from it. Now about the list. Again, I'm using the collections type to call the create list method, and there are many overloads for this one. And I can directly pass some initial elements here, or I can add them later with the add range function, a method which accepts either an array of integer or an enumerable of integer. And of course, I can insert also a range at a certain index. And so again, I create a list with the numbers 1 to 9 here. And to show you about the deferred execution for the enumerable and in this case, the where method, again, I want to have the odd numbers, but I assign it in this line here already. And then later I add some element to my list. And only then I iterate over the odd numbers enumerable. And in this case, for the first iteration of the list, I get the numbers 1 to 9, and then I'm printing the odd numbers, and you can see it contains the 11, because even though I assigned the enumerable for the odd numbers in this line and only after added the 11 to the original list, at the point I'm iterating over the odd numbers, this one is then seeing the items that are in the list at this point. If I cleared the list before, the odd numbers would contain no elements. So then there's the more advanced types like map, dictionary, or multi-map. And map is an associative collection that contains the methods to add, remove, or look up a key. The dictionary is then a collection of key value pairs where the key has to be unique. We know that from the RTL already. But then there's also a multi-map. And this is basically like a dictionary where for each key you can have a collection of values. Or think of it as a dictionary of key and list of values. And there are different versions for the collections for each key. And you can then control with the creation how they behave. Let's see. So I have my multi-map for integer is the key and a string. And I then have my lorem ipsum generator here, which generates 100 words from the lorem ipsum. I'm just iterating them. And then for the length as the key, I'm adding all the strings for each length. And then I'm iterating my multi-map keys, which are the length from the strings I added into them. And then for each length, I'm iterating the words. And this is the, as you know from the dictionary, the access for this key. But in this case, this one is not just returning one value, but again, a collection of strings. Because for each number, I can have several strings that have the same length. So as we can see here, we have our words with 2 letters, 3 letters, and so on. But you can already see there are, well, either not sorted and there are duplicates in it. What if I don't want to have the duplicates? Well, as I said, there are different multi-maps. In this case, the standard create multi-map creates a dictionary of list for values. So if you have duplicates for every key, the duplicates get added, just like in a list. Just if I change it to a hash multi-map, the collection for the strings for each length is a set, and a set can only contain a unique value once. So again, if I execute this one here, and then execute this, you can see the duplicates are no longer in it, because every time I try to add a duplicate, it just simply ignores it. But in this case, the strings were not sorted by some criteria. What if I want to do that? Well, I can use another multimap, which is then a tree multimap, and that one, instead of a hash map internally, uses a tree, which uses sorting to make items unique in it. So if I'm executing this one, I have then my words by length and even sorted without explicitly saying so. Of course, I could only use the hash multimap and then use this one here. But then if I want to iterate this very often, I would always have to call the order, and this would be an operation that would be performed every time I iterate the items. I mentioned set already, which is like an enum set, but not just for enums, but for any type. And think of it as a dictionary where you don't care of the value, you just care of the uniqueness for the value you put in there. So they're either hash table based sets, and they preserve insertion order, contrast to the RTL dictionary, which does not preserve the insertion order. And then there's a tree implementation, which stores the item in an order given by the comparer that I'm passing, or actually the default comparer if I don't passing anything. And then I have a multiset, which is like a dictionary for a key and a counter. So in this case, you can count how many times you add something, or you can remove the item. And this is very easy a type for very easy counting occurrences of items. So we can see this. The last code example, again, I'm using my lorem ipsum, which is just a function that returns an array of string. And I'm creating my multiset of string and directly passing in, because this one accepts an array of string. So I have my word counts, and word counts has a property called entries. And this one returns a collection for the item and the count. Identical to a dictionary where you would manually count up or down for each key when you want to add it. And in this case, I can then see how often each word was in my generated array for my text. And if I wanted to have these word counts ordered, I can simply say ordered by count. And if I iterate this one, you can see the one that was there 8 times is on the top, and those where there was actually none, that was just 1 time, but they're now sorted by the occurrence. So if you want to know more, you can browse the code, look into the many unit tests. There's lots of XML documentation inside the code itself, which also helps you once you use the methods, because it directly appears in your editor in the hint. We are getting the documentation improved and getting started articles for the 2.0 release. And we welcome your feedback. Either get in touch on the forums, and yes, Google Groups is still a thing, or if you found a bug, please let us know on our issue tracker, And well, I think now we have 10 more minutes for Q&A.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that. Very educational session for sure. So there's a few questions here, actually quite a few questions here. We'll get through as many as we can. What versions of Spring4D does Delphi work with? Or what version of Delphi does Spring4D work with?
XE and higher.
Okay. So quite a few. Could the nullable be a string field and then parsed back?
Could the nullable, well, nullable itself is not a string, so it could not be a string field, but you can use a nullable for string where you can say, okay, I don't have a string or an empty string if you want to differentiate. Often an empty string is meant as I don't have any data, but sometimes you have an empty string, but still the additional state of no data. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. So this is an interesting one. How heavy is Spring4D? And I know it's modular, so you only use parts of it, but is there like a minimum impact it has on your application?
Well, it depends on what things you are using. If you have followed my ongoing development for 2.0, it's aiming at reducing some of the heaviness, where heaviness means like the binary size in the end you have because of generics, and generics can create quite some code in your executable, and this is something I'm trying to reduce, similar to like the refactoring in the generics collections in the RTL. After all, it depends on what things you use. If you just use a nullable type, then well, it's just a few bytes added to your code. If you use the full-blown collections and the dependency injection container, well, that's more code in your executable. I think that the linker of the Delphi compiler should do its work and remove everything that's not used.
Oh,
and
that's
due
great.
to the modular design of the units, well, if you just add the Spring unit and there's much in it that is not actually used, then it's not in the binary in the end.
Okay. With nullable, if you compare it to, for example, a t-date time, if the result, or what will the result be if the nullable type is null and the date time has a date?
Not equal.
Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah. What have you looked at the new managed records in 10.4 to encapsulate your T and T event of T so that it won't require create and destroy with tri-family blocks?
Yes, I did, and actually for the more heavy, I was expecting first that you ask about the nullable of T, because that might be more of a candidate for rewriting as a custom managed record. But for the event of T, that would be quite heavy because there's an object behind that is doing most of the work. So that would still have to be created. It's not in the record itself. The record is just holding an interface to an object.
But it could at least remove the create and free tri-family block, right?
Well, it would reduce the interface inside the record, because it would then directly reference the object, and that would be created. Yeah, but I measured it and it doesn't matter, to be honest.
Okay.
It's not like you
T.
have millions. It's not like you have millions of the object of T instances lying around. So if it's a type that you have like a huge amount of data, then it might matter if you have this record with an interface in it, or if you have a custom managed record type where you can directly call the initialize and finalize methods, but
So
not for event of T.
I think he was looking at it from a smart pointer type point of view, for example, that you wouldn't have to manually destroy it.
Yeah, I saw the custom managed record implementation for smart pointers that came out just a month or so ago, and I actually benchmarked it against my implementation, that it's the difference is so small that it's not worth the time to actually if-def my code to just make it use the custom managed record for 10.4 and then the other one before, because it's such a minor improvement.
Okay. Shared of T and I shared of T are really nice. What is the performance?
Well, you still have a try finally block implicitly added there because you have the interface in the managed type. So you get if you classically have the try finally to free your string list like this in this example, that's the same for this one because you have the managed type and the implicitly compiler added try finally blocks. There's more of an issue with the try finally itself, but you know about that if you look into RSP.
So a few people pointed out that Nick's books do go into some detail on Spring4D as well. So if people want to find some more documentation on this, they can.
Yes, indeed.
And Carlos said, it's not a question, but Spring4D is mandatory for him. Thanks to Nick's books.
3D or 4D?
Or Spring4D, Spring4D. Yeah, I'm guessing you mean Spring4D. There's also a presentation by a Brazilian guy who misses his name that is huge on Spring4D as well. So very appreciative. Is Spring4D compatible with C++ Builder?
No. Sorry.
Is it so? Is it just that it's not tested, or is it's just explicitly not compatible?
I'm very much assuming it's not compatible because some things might not be accessible from C++ builder side. I also never generated the specific header files you have to explicitly enable for the Delphi compiler to produce. And I remember there are some language features that are not supported by C++ builder, like class constructors and things like that.
Okay. Just a second here.
Although some of the things you don't want to use from Spring4D if you're already using C++, I mean, like the smart pointer or some
That's
things
true.
like
Yeah,
that.
your smart pointers. Yep.
Probably I'd rather use the STL collections rather than the Spring4D ones.
What is the impact to runtime performance of the application when using Spring4D?
Again, a very broad question. I mean, it depends. If you would using the collections of Spring4D, at least in the 2.0 version, which is again also on performance, because before it had some glitches with the interface calls and virtual methods behind interfaces, not what the Delphi compiler likes. Produces not optimal code, but it's not like it's making things worse or faster. Maybe rather a bit faster on some things because especially the collections are pretty optimized.
Okay. A lot of thank yous and such. Are there concepts to make events and collections thread safe?
Events itself are thread safe as they are invoked. What was previously not thread safe, which is still a pending work I'm doing for 2.0, is adding or removing event handlers from one thread and invoking it from another. However, invoking itself is completely thread safe. If you have a case where that is not, then please report it with, well, if possible, a test case scenario. Well, the event triggering, that should be thread safe. The collections itself are not thread safe, but that is by design because many collections are very hard to made thread safe. And if you're looking for a specific thread safe collections, then you might consider looking into the OTL.
Okay. Then there's a few questions here about where people can find what your future plans are for Spring4D or find news and such.
Well, either on the Google Groups or on my blog. I'm actually planning to put out some what's new in 2.0 plans on there, and well, watch the commits on the repository.
Okay. So, this is a Google's Groups mailing list, it looks like, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's right. Google Plus is the thing I was thinking of when I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, no,
Oh.
Google Plus does not exist anymore, but Google Groups still does.
What
Well,
is the website for your blog? Yeah, yeah.
I
What's
was
the
on
website for your blog?
this on the second slide of the presentation, which you will all get.
Okay. Let's see. We're about out of time here, so I'm just skimming really quick here. So I will share the list with you, and there's other questions you can certainly follow up with them later. But so it says sometimes it's hard to decide where to place the week of T in group 1. Is there some more information? It's hard to follow the question here in this format. Are there any guidelines or places where you might explain where to place week of T better?
Well, where to place it? I mean, it's
in group 1 in T person relationship, do T person group week.
Okay, if you have a person group, well, it's one of the depends answers, I guess. Depends if you want to have the strong relation of the group to the persons or from the persons to its group. Well, one is the strong relation where things reside in, and the other one is just a back reference to. So it depends which one is like the root. If you have like the groups, and then there are people in groups, and then they just have a reference to what group they are in, then it's better to have the strong reference from the group in the people.
And are there containers that resemble a balanced binary tree, like the TST symbols systools tree?
I don't know that one tree, but the only tree we have is a red-black tree, which is used by the sets and the sorted dictionaries to make the items sorted. There are no more trees.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for all the hard work you do in the community and in on Spring4D, and for putting this presentation together for us today.
You're welcome.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you all around. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.